all these amazing things. And we did in this film, the last interview with James Brown, the last interview with Tito Puente. We had red buttons in there, all these famous people. I called my life, as I probably told you, I said, it's failing upwards. Like, I've just been around and I never stopped. But I grew up in Sid's house. Sid was the guy who brought the Beatles to America and the Rolling Stones and Moody Blues. So you have to understand, Abe was this very serious mobster character, and Sid was absolutely the sweetest man in the world. It was, in fact, now that I look back at Daniel and Townes, they were like two guys who couldn't deal with the music business. And Townes was dark and Daniel was optimistic, and nobody really wanted them at that time. Perfectionism and obsession will get you going and keep you in the game and kill you in the end. And the best people I know who did the best work kill their own work with perfectionism, kill their own ability to get it out there. And if I've gotten over anything, it's that.
Welcome to the Origins Club, sponsored by IDX. The Origins Club is a new channel in which we take a look at interesting people and artists and athletes and creators from around the world. And we find out what makes them tick, what their story is, who they are, and why they do what they do. And so I'd like to welcome our first guest, Jason Ressler. Jason is an amazing filmmaker. He's a documentarian as well. Two notables, Sid Bernstien Presents and The Sheriff of Mars. And I wanted Jason to be the first because I think there's a lot of creators out there that they just wonder what makes good storytelling, what makes people tick. But it comes from, I think, a deep and creative place inside. And when I was talking with Jason, when we first met, he just had it. I think it's something that everyone needs, whether it's in great volume or that little spark. But Jason has it when he talks about his experiences and his stories. And so I wanted to capture that for our audience and for people on IDX. So enough of me talking. I'd like to introduce Jason. Jason, how are you? And welcome to the show.
I'm great, thank you. That was very nice. That was unwarranted, but thank you. I'm glad to be here. I hadn't realized I was the first guest, so that's really cool. So what would you like me to start?
I think the first thing I'd love to start with is, since it's called the Origins Club, how did you start in filmmaking? And give us a little bit about your background and who you are and how you got into writing and in documentaries.
Okay. Well, first I want to be clear, I'm quite a failure in a lot of it. And that's important. I think there's a thing, if you need to do this thing, you keep going, and through failure, if you don't need to do all the arts, if you don't really need to do them, or if you're not just getting lucky, or if you're not in some version where it's easier, don't do it. I failed for most of it. Sid Bernstien's a film that never got out. Maybe it'll get out now, but that's 25 years ago I started making that movie, 24, almost 25. We made lots of shorts. I started off writing. So I call most of my life, you met me in a very nice event, and I know a lot of people. I've had some success in certain areas. And I called my life, as I probably told you, I said, it's failing upwards. I've just been around and I never stopped. And I've stayed interested in the areas I'm interested, very often to my detriment. I've been a total idiot many times. And then I've reflected on that saying, oh, well, that's just who you are. I mean, I am a total idiot, but aside from that, it's like, well, you're this thing, and when you can blame yourself for being this thing, or you can just kind of lean into it through failure and through success. And I think it probably leads you to the question of what do you value, why is it of value to you? And then that's where you find your sort of essence. So I feel very bad about the failed projects we're talking about. Some of them are in process. I don't feel very failed on some of them also. So, and my origin started, I was a kind of bad childhood, a kind of glorious bad childhood, but I was always reading, even from a young age. I think a lot of artists and artist types and a lot of the best artists I've seen fail miserably, but the smartest ones, it's very hard to bridge that thing from commercial or getting out there from the internal life. So, and that's a very hard bridge. And there's eras where those people get taken or grabbed by a business model, which maybe you're developing now. That business model has to help them because maybe they're not great on Instagram. I managed Daniel and Topolsky, and I'm the worst manager. I'm just the only guy willing to do it, so it makes me the best manager, right? But I'm very bad at those things, and I'm not and we're not monetized to professionalize them. It's this catch-22, and then it's like, do those things matter? You got to find what matters to you.
Expand on that a little bit. You're the only one that was willing to do it. Why? And did it just fall into place? Was it something you were determined to do, or?
I think failing, or maybe it was some childhood thing. I have this two feelings. One, I really love some particular artistic beauties, and I think Daniel's absolutely one of the great American storytellers in song. And then the other part is it's not that I like the underdog, because of course I do. I like a lot of things. So I don't think you just because somebody becomes successful, they're not the underdog or whatever. It's like, are they doing something quality or not? I grew up in a New York City that was dangerous and that was glorious, where you'd see Andy Warhol walking down the street and you'd also see somebody, you get mugged, and these things were very hand in hand. But I think it was the most individualistic city. I mean, I've been around the world. You're filming me now, I'm in France. And I've been all over the world, and you'd have to probably go to 10 cities now to grab that thing, to feel that essence of what it was, because it was also the most concentrated. It was the center of the world in many ways. And of course, when you're growing up in the place, you don't really appreciate that. And I didn't really appreciate that, given my circumstances of how it happened. My father married somebody, and we ended up in Manhattan when I was young. And there was very big positives and very big negatives. And the big negatives were I came from this nice neighborhood in Queens, and I'm going to public school at 8 years old, and the older kids are crying because they just got like mugged by a bayonet in the middle of the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Like, it was violent. There was a big negative there. There was like a lot of, but it was also beautifully artistic, and you had creativity all over the place all the time. And when if you're the type, you latch on to that. So with Daniel, sorry to make a long story longer, but with Daniel, I understand that underdog, and he's a guy who is incredible, and who was actually part of this very famous bunch of things in the 70s that he couldn't deal with, because he was part of the outlaw country music scene, which just sort of paralleled rock and roll, where it became much more authentic. And so people who came out of that at some point were Willie Nelson and Emmylou Harris, but it's really like guys like Townes Van Zandt, who now everybody thinks Townes in a certain way is famous now, at least in country music, and he's famous in the UK. But he really got his a lot of press in recent years because Matthew McConaughey and that True Detective film they use a lot of Townes Van Zandt songs. So, but it was, in fact, now that I look back at Daniel and Townes, they were like two guys who couldn't deal with the music business. And Townes was dark and Daniel was optimistic, and nobody really wanted them at that time. And even Townes' songs came because other people started recording them. But Daniel saved Townes Van Zandt's life from this heroin overdose and just couldn't take the darkness of the thing, and went on around the world and was this lost artist. And when I started with him, he was like, there was this very iconic country music photo on Guy Clark's house with his wife, Susanna Clark, who was famous, Townes Van Zandt, and it was other. So one of the things I haven't failed at is I'm decent at media. I've worked with a lot of media folks over the years. Again, there's a kind of failure, I didn't get the artistic side, and I had to learn to do some other tricks. So I corrected that. I got his Daniel story out there, and so we're able to see but this guy's he's like, I'm sitting on 500 of the best songs nobody's ever heard, and they should be in the American musical canon. I've made this film, so he's gotten a lot of press, but I'm also one man that's not very good at this business. That was actually a person meant to be managed, not to be managing. So when I say I'm somebody who did this, you asked me why I'm the only one to manage Daniel. It was an accident. He told me, I knew his family, and he told me, he just always wanted to record an album. He tried to send tapes. This is 10 years ago, almost more than 12 years ago, when he's in his 60s. And I'm talking about his songs were something extraordinary, and they're extraordinary. They're unique pieces of Americana that nobody has really heard. That we put out a bunch of albums. Just thank God for the digital age, because otherwise there's no way. Because nobody, and this is important, nobody will ever take a crack at an old guy at this point, which is actually wrong statistically. And I like to explain this to people in the same way I explained both Black Panther and Wonder Woman coming out 5 years ago, whatever it was. No. And everybody's surprised. A female star can make a movie, an action movie that's a super hit. A black film can make an action. These are not it didn't happen. These stats have been here for years. Nobody cared for this for 30 years already. I mean, you have these obvious stats going back to the 70s with Shaft and things like that show that, hey, there's no reason not to put diversity. And I think the first one I'd ever seen it was Rush Hour, where Jackie Chan and I just forgot the other guy, Chris, whatever the actor's name, and he's just like, you had like a diverse cast, and of course it was a hit because nobody cares about these things. And it's the same with music. Like if you look at who buys music, but nobody will take a chance on saying, oh wait, all these like old musicians are famous, let's also put an old guy's music out. But you saw what happened with Searching for Sugar Man, and you've seen happen here of hits. And the industry, of course, it's changed in ways that are beneficial that I can get this out, but I don't have that talent. So I'm sitting here just pushing albums out that other people should pick up on. And that's why I was really interested in what you were doing, because like the platform doesn't really exist for people just to say, hey, let's get this thing out. Because honestly, I have 500 songs. We've put out about 80 of them. I've been sitting on a beautiful album made by one of France's best folk bands, Cocoon. One of the guys from there produced Daniel's album. And I'm just like, why would I just want to dump it out now to be listened to again? So we've been putting out acoustic stuff. But again, somebody smart or somebody who knows the industry. You and I were recently we're hanging out with Franklin Vanderbilt, who's Lenny Kravitz's drummer, and he had a whole idea on how to put an album out. So like people are thinking of different things.
It's really interesting. Actually, Franklin will be somebody that we're talking to as well, just because he's got like a really interesting outlook, like you said. And going back to what you were talking about with Rush Hour, Jackie Chan, and Chris Tucker. Yeah, that was something where I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but because you grew up in New York, that really was this, not that it's not now, but like you said, you had to go, now you'd have to go to like 10 to 20 different places to kind of get that same energy. But you also were in an era where so many people creatively were doing just some really intense things. And you grew up around that energy, right? So like, if you could, take me through some of the stories that you saw growing up and some of the people. You had mentioned a few really incredible stories to me, but which one do you feel would be impactful? Something that people don't know normally about that time and that era.
Okay, well, I'll tell you a couple of things. And what the creativity of New York, it's hard to express, but like you'd go every place and there'd be something going on. You'd always see a street mime, you'd always see performers. But then I get to my high school, as you can imagine, I was a crazy fucker. I mean, off this thing. And so, but as a kid, I was even more maniac. So I was one of the few people I knew by 16 or something, and even earlier, I was already playing football. Like my school didn't have a team, so I was playing in like the ghetto teams up in the Edenwald projects. Me and my friend were the white kids in the league. We were very exposed to rap early from like Curtis Blow. And I was also then going to clubs later, which were also extraordinary places. And what people don't realize is like these scenes were like, New York was ethnically diverse, which didn't mean they were really integrated. It was very complex, but you see the New York today and it's like super like, I guess, wokey or whatever you're going to say. Like, and of course it's far less integrated. Like you get on the train and like there's no ethnic neighborhoods in Manhattan anymore except for Chinatown. And that's because the Chinese, if you look around the world, they don't sell property. That's one of those things they just don't sell. So Chinatown expanded, but it's all gone. Whereas like you would have an ethnic neighborhood every, 20 blocks in New York. And we were more together. We were understanding each other's cultures despite like very big economic jumps and poverty jumps. It was still, you didn't escape. You didn't have your bubbles. And there was like an edge to the city that was artistic. And I think you can see movements go artistically every decade in some different places. You can trace film like that, but I don't go into that. But so at the other side of my thing, we're like, I was going to the ghetto and it was like, oh, my friends who were 16 and he was like 16 or 17 we're like, oh, we just saw LL Cool J at a party. And I would know, so the rap scene was very much a part of my life, but it was it was Africa Bambaataa, who was already like the original, and it was like Houdini and Spoonie G and all this kind of stuff that was starting to become popular, but also radio was very like narrow. So New York had its radio, it has rap radio, like what was it? Maybe KRS or DRE, one of those stations. You had or 97, I think it was 97. Anyway, you had all these like things were very like New York, and it wasn't anybody else. And I played football with a guy named Percy Carey, beautiful guy. And he got shot 9 times. Later, he was actually working for NWA. He lived. and he was a writer. And so when NWA was starting, he was out there already on the West Coast, but we were football players together, and he was one of my good buddies. He's a really interesting character, and probably, if you can, worth talking to. I haven't spoken to him in years, but his life was interesting on many levels. But so I knew all those guys. On the other hand, I was going to clubs a little bit later. People don't understand like the clubs and the art scene and the rap scene were all kind of converging in downtown Manhattan, and some kind of fashion scene. And people don't understand that these were very, very much a part of each other. They weren't split off. Like, it wasn't some rappers and some. It came out of the Bronx. It came out of the place, but it was very much like part of the club culture. So I even know guys who are famous now. Like, of course, I knew them all well. Like again, as a kid, like I was younger than them. But like Michael Alec is famous now. I don't know if you know the name, but he was famous for murder actually later, because he was just got out of control as a club promoter. But he was really, Matthew, it's a kid's name. Macaulay Culkin did a movie where he played him. So I knew all those guys like Keoki. I look up to people like all the transvestites of the era. Like RuPaul was actually my least favorite, funnily enough, only because I was also knew all the Vietnam vets. And at one time, RuPaul did this like thing at the Tunnel, which was a big club, and she did this whole thing on Vietnam vets. And of course, she was really fun. He was really funny making fun of it. But there was all this like constant creativity in the club. So it was like the clubs like the World and the Tunnel, and I was in those places just watching as like a kid. Like, people understand, like they let us into the clubs. Like, it was very perverse. I got into clubs because I was 15 years old. That era. So it was very decadent. You got into bars. Like, there was no rules in New York when I grew up, and that's important to understand. Like, so I was around all these forgotten people. RuPaul's remembered, but like Larry T and Lahoma Van Zandt, all these like wonderful transvestites who were incredible creatives. And again, I didn't know that they were creatives. I knew it. I was attached to the thing, but you're 15. You don't know that the world's not like this, right? You don't know that so you're going all these things. And then there was the other side where like my best friend, and the Sid Bernstien film came out of that later, a decade and a half later. But I grew up in Sid's house. Sid was the guy who brought the Beatles to America, and the Rolling Stones and Moody Blues. I mean, we did all these amazing things. And we did in this film the last interview with James Brown, the last interview with Tito Puente. We had Red Buttons in there, all these famous people. Again, it's a project I failed on. It's never been released. We'll see if that changes right now. But I grew up like in his house, and I really attached to his psychology because he was super kind, and my house wasn't super kind. And his house was disordered, which is funny because his son attached a lot to my house because my house was ordered. And his house, they were getting kicked out of their apartments pretty regularly. And this is a guy who invented the stadium concert and brought the Beatles to America. And one story you and I were talking about, which is probably referring to, is that I try to break this news just to be, because I'm also like, try to be a good promoter, not sure, annual. And so I try to break it on CD, whatever what's that? The website is. I'm just forgetting what CD net, whatever it is. Anyway, I did this interview like 5 years ago, and nobody picked up on it, basically saying how Sid would kill me if he was allowed to say this, but how the mob brought Beatles to America. So I grew up with a mafia father, like lawyer. My dad was like a lawyer for the mob, for the cartels, for all the kind of big posse. So I grew up around all these criminals. And that's another thing to remember, like all this New York stuff, it was very crime oriented. Like the mob controlled New York when we grew up. So there's nobody whose family didn't touch on the mob or have to do with it. Or there's no store who didn't have their garbage delivered. So that whole Frank Sinatra stuff still carried over till about the 90s. And then the world started changing. So growing up, my dad was a major lawyer for Russian organized crime. I had all these records and stuff. I'd get a lot of free stuff. So the city really ran on it. And so, I mean, when I say ran on it, I mean everything ran on it in one form or another. So with this story I try to break, because nobody realizes that if you look at the Beatles, like I say this right here now, the Beatles were brought to America by the mob, and nobody knows that. And I'm sure they don't. And I never get to tell this story because, like, I know this because Theater 3 is the poster that brought the Beatles to America, right? If you look at the first Beatles concert, Carnegie Hall, it says Theater 3 Productions. And Theater 3 was Sid Bernstien, who was working at an agency, I think the predecessor to William Morris and Endeavor at the time. And you can find this all in his books very nicely. And he had this idea to bring the Beatles to America. And because he heard he had been reading the papers, the British papers, you see this band's getting bigger. He calls Brian Epstein. He agrees to have a concert in Carnegie Hall. He just wanted to wait till the album broke in America. And then the rest of the history is pretty known. Except Sid, the agency wouldn't let him. They said they thought he was crazy to want to bring a British band, but they speak with an English accent. And he thought they were crazy, but they speak English. Like, why wouldn't anybody like a British band? So he wasn't allowed as an agent to promote. So what he did was hide the promotion with this under this Theater 3, but the three were, I'm forgetting the guy's name. Anyway, guy Billy something who's on the next Rolling Stones poster, that's the first Rolling Stones poster that Sid did. And I can look up his name quickly if you want. Sure. Billy Fields. So you'll see on the Rolling Stones poster when Sid brought them, and Billy Fields was just somebody helping him organize stuff. But the third person was Abe Margolez. Now, Abe Margolez was informally, let's just say, an advisor to one of the big families of New York.
Gotcha.
Big mob families. And Jewish advisor, and big one. And he was known for like a famous steakhouse at the time. Actually, this is probably much later, but Abe's Steakhouse. He had owned some restaurants before. He had tried to buy the Yankees. You can find this article someplace with the Yankees, where Steinbrenner was trying to buy the Yankees. He tried to buy them, but the league knew he was mobbed up, so they wouldn't let him buy the Yankees. Until Steinbrenner got them, probably in 1970. I found that article once in the New York Times, something about it. It was a little bit ambiguous, but I knew the reasons. Anyway, Abe was Sid's best friend from childhood, and so you have to understand, Abe was this very serious mobster character. And Sid was absolutely the sweetest man in the world, right? Absolutely the kindest, gentlest, couldn't think about money. If he had $100 to feed himself, he'd give you 50 of it. You had this generosity of spirit that was unlike it. But his best friend from childhood from the Bronx was this guy, and who was also this guy who was quite generous, but quite a serious gangster. So that was the person who gave Sid for his money for all his endeavors. And just to show like how their relationship was, Sid made money on that Carnegie Hall show. He tried to give it back to Abe. He said, put it to the next one. So the next one was the Rolling Stones, and they brought him over, and they were on, and etc. But Theater 3, the three members are Billy Fields, Sid Bernstien, and Abe Margolez. And nobody realized who Abe was.
Why do you think that didn't like get out as much?
I think nobody knows. Like, facts get lost. I mean, you're talking about, it wouldn't have been anything anybody talked about or cared about when it happened. So then it's like, I didn't put it in the movie because I wouldn't have done that. Sid wouldn't have wanted it, and it wouldn't have mattered. It's quite I mean, you can't do everything in a film anyway. And I had things like, and it wasn't really his character. Maybe it is an interesting part of the story. Sid was never, I don't think Sid could even perceive who Abe was. To him, it's just this guy who's so beautiful and wonderful. But even though we knew stories when like the mob would try to come in your concerts. And I remember when we were kids, we really looked up to Abe because we had heard that Sid had tried to do a concert at the Brooklyn, I guess it was Brooklyn Paramount, and two gangsters had come up, or maybe this was it was in a Boston concert, and said, listen, we're on the show and you're going to pay us whatever. So Sid knew enough of his friend to call his friend and said this happened. And the next day, those two guys come back, and they come back laughing, apologizing, saying you were connected with, like, they were of course low down. So they had to come back and apologize. So that was the New York, and I remember, and Sid was aware of who was a mobster and not. He'd be like, oh, that guy's a lieutenant, and they'd go to like all these places, but it was all these Italian restaurants in Little Italy. They loved Paolucci's, all these places are gone, Il Boccacino, and everything was mobbed up. So that was just the way it was. So by the time I made that movie, like, it just dawned on me, like, I guess 6 years when I did this interview, like, oh, well, actually nobody realizes who the Theater 3 people are, and if they do know the name, nobody's probably ever realized that Abe Margolez was this guy, because he is, and I know it, and a handful of people know it, and a handful of people alive know it. But it's funny because everybody went to that restaurant. Like, his steakhouse, Abe's, was just a like Upper East Side steakhouse that everybody, Shirley MacLaine, all these people went to. I met my friend's bar mitzvah. I went to famous comedian Henny Youngman was there. Sid's son, like, he knew everybody. Everybody knew Sid all over the world, and because he was a beautiful guy, like a really beautiful guy. Half the movie is people, like famous stars, talking to me about how he loves to eat and what he liked to eat because he was 300 pounds, Sid. But James Brown in that movie, who was saying Sid was important for racial rights as Martin Luther King and the Kennedys, and which was really interesting because I didn't expect that to come out. And James Brown was a very serious guy. Like, James Brown, I had no appreciation for James Brown until I met him. I never cared about his music. I never appreciated him. And I'm sitting with a guy, and I'm like, oh, this guy's hyper intelligent, like he was something special in his character, a little crazy, as intelligent can be,
it does,
yeah. But I got to go to his house, so it was really nice to be able to go to James Brown's house, because what a thing to do, right? And you go to his house, and it's like, I guess it's North Carolina. It's like, no, maybe South. It's like Augusta, right over the river. I think that's where the South Carolina Augusta border is. And then you're just like, in this kind of like really like countryside, wherever that house was. But and actually his door in a normal countryside house. But then it's like big gold bees on like a kind of side. And he had this date with this woman who was proper and getting you in, like real security, it looked like. But of course, like just 5 feet down, you can kind of jump over the head. It was really just a character. But you got him kind of like, it was kind of like Vegas in there a little bit. And people told me, don't dare call him James. You call him Mr. Brown. He was very formal. And I think it's a very black Southern thing.
Yeah.
And he said, you'll get thrown out if you call him that. And I'm like, I think his son picked us up and took us over there. One of his sons, he had a lot of children. And he was like, so, but he'll call you Mr. Ressler. And he had an assistant who actually had hair like him and was called Mr. Washington. He referred to his assistant, his house guy, as Mr. Washington. He was very proper and formal. But funnily enough, during this interview, Sid had written him a Dear James on his book. And James and Brown didn't know what I knew about this whole thing about Karen. They opened that book and singing the Dear James, and who had been younger than Sid by a lot, like 20 years younger. And he goes, just looks. He goes, he can call me James and I can call him Sid. You know, he just said it kind of out loud to himself.
Whoa.
Like, oh, thank God I knew what he was talking about, because he had no idea I'd been informed or anything. But I was just like, oh, I caught that beautiful moment just listening to him. So, and then I understood, like, he took, like, Sid brought all these, like, first of all from the Latin years, and he brought all these, like, Latino acts, like people Campo and Tito Puente into mainstream venues, and he did it for black artists. And I guess he brought James Brown to Madison Square Garden for the first time. So all those guys were really appreciative of that, and a lot of other artists. Ray Charles was the same. I didn't get to interview Charles. I was supposed to, but he passed away. Same with Quincy Jones, who passed away. I never got to do that interview, but he had given Quincy his big break.
Really?
Jazz guys too, a huge amount of jazz guys. I interviewed the guy from, what's the big label? I'm just blanking on what the big label is. Blue Note. And they all talked about him. Ornette Coleman, just everybody was like on Sid. I didn't get all these interviews down, but I understood that Sid had just been there. Like, and so I related to him even not knowing that. I just related him for his character and that needed that thing. So you asked me, like, that guy failed over and over and over. Is his life a failure? His children suffered. He left him no money. He was getting kicked out of apartments all the time. And where's the line of character and doing a thing, or where's the line where you can't help yourself, right? And I think I understood that deeply as an artist. Failed that I started off as a writer. I wrote a book when I was 21, and it was a book about terrorism, so I knew a lot about terrorism, so that got me a lot of political thing later, even though I didn't publish it. But I was always like perfectionist, and that's a problem. Actually, that's another thing I would tell people. That's my warning. Perfectionism and obsession will get you going and keep you in the game and kill you in the end. And the best people I know who did the best work kill their own work with perfectionism, kill their own ability to get it out there. And if I've gotten over anything, it's that. I'm like, I'll like finish this little book on government I'm doing. So if your viewers need something to fall asleep to in a couple of months, I can read the first few fucking pages of this. But it's about American electoral reform. And it's important, like in my view of for Americans to understand this thing, because I know a lot about government. I worked a lot with them, and I always had my hand in it. And I'm just sort of putting out, I'm just like, oh, this has got to be good enough. And I wrote 2,000 pages on my crazy early life, so I got to just edit that down and get it out there. Films, I can't do that Sid Bernstien film. Somebody will either pick up and say, wow, that's a great thing, or they're not. Now it's a beautiful piece of history. I wish I was able to make more films. We were definitely very cutting edge and trying to also do new things with documentary, but naively didn't know, oh, the music rights and things like that would get us crushed. And now those things won't get us crushed because the world's changed, because the internet has changed everything and the way media is and media views. So that's changed, but it's an old movie. But there was some interest recently in it. And then, to my surprise, but Daniel Topolsky is absolutely the most important thing I want to get out there, because he's an absolutely beautiful person, and that's part of the reason he just could never get out there. He was sitting on a Bordeaux farm for 40 years writing songs, having escaped the American music industry. The industry that didn't want him anyway, that he wouldn't have known how to navigate. He was just this great songwriter, but then on the other hand, he was never tainted by the industry. So perfected the craft of song in his way, and he's never got touched. Imagine if, like, I don't know, somebody like Bob Dylan or maybe Billie Eilish, who's doing great, just never had to make that next hit, but could just work on songwriting, and for 40 years. And then you come out with magic. You come out with, like, the guy's Van Gogh of American songwriting, and I think that's key. Like, Van Gogh didn't make it in his lifetime, And he has incredible songs that I've done a terrible job of getting out, except that they're out there. There's like, at least there's the first album. It was our first album, and we like, it wasn't perfect except in the blues songs by any means of what Daniel wanted. So we put out a bunch of acoustic music, but then I'm sitting on some other albums. And again, I don't want to see 500 songs never get recorded, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like you've got this documentary that's got some of the last interviews with some great people. You've got these albums. Were you just waiting for the right time, or is it just that there was like a lot to do in it? What is it? I know that there's IDX, and I'll definitely like push towards that in a second. But what was it that was outside of the perfectionism? Was there anything else holding it back, or you're just like, I don't know, when this is going to be produced? Or
yeah, I gave up on the Sid Bernstien film. I'm just like, okay, that's never going to see the light of day for all the reasons. And that was that for my brain. And lately, somehow, some people are coming towards me from it.
Yeah.
Daniel Topolsky stuff is what I care about absolutely the most, because he's sitting here alive. He's sitting there making songs. I feel like I'm failing him all the time. Now he's gotten a bunch of press, and I don't know what to do. I'm not a manager type. I'm a very good person when it comes to strategy, when a thing is moving, when it's like a crisis issue, when it's media. That's why he has a bunch of media, right? Because I'm able to I know how to talk about those things. But I don't, it's my failure. There's no other way to say that. And on the other hand, you can say, wow, well, look, you've gotten from no albums to 6 or 7 albums out, but they're sitting there. Some people are listening. He's not going to go hit the road in a big way. So then the question is, my job now, from where I view, is like, I've recorded a bunch more songs kind of badly, just like got them on just down so they're there. I have one beautiful album, but it needs to be funded. It needs to be like, I don't care if I ever make a dime. I just want to see it out there. And you asked me about motivation before. It's just like, doing beautiful things is doing beautiful things. And this guy is just sitting on this farm making beautiful songs, fun songs, optimistic songs people should hear. And as a media person, I know it. I know why I have a hard time with him, because there's no darkness. And if I could push on that, and I purposely not done it because it's in his spirit, because I started a few fights a little bit for myself, just to get a little press, but basically on him. But it didn't really work because because there's nothing dark in his soul. He's absolutely a guy who brings things together. His songs are, I think of like songs like Don't Go Pokin' in the Okefenokee, which is on his acoustic Outlaw album. And that song, nobody can storytell like that anymore. I mean, it's a song about a kid who gets kidnapped, and the animals of the Everglades save the kid from the kidnapper, bank robber kidnapper. It's very beautiful. Yeah, it's so beautiful. I've never had the money to make a video of that, Like, and again, that's me, because I'm just like, at that stage, and I'm kind of an old guy, and I don't have those relationships or that energy where I'm just asking young people like, hey, can you make a video, right? But I'm sure somebody watching this would be like, if I can knock something so beautifully animated out in a short time, especially in this era. And I don't have the concentrated energy anymore to say, that all these songs should have videos. But that one song alone is so perfect. And those albums are really perfect. They're sort of Southern folk, bluesy storytelling in a way that I don't even know what to call them. But they're something on their own. They're on their own category.
Let's say this. This is a call to all you TikTokers and influencers out there who can create some short form media. You can get your hands on that and see what you can do. That would be one really good step. And then the next thing I would think is going into IDX here. I think IDX, just for people who don't know, is a new type of marketplace stock exchange where instead of investing in companies, you get to invest in people, and you get to share in revenue streams that they give you different types of profit participation in. Not ownership, not every time, but all different types of creative ways to share in the profit of revenue streams. So I had no idea about Theater 3. I had no idea about all these, people that Sid meant so much to. I think a lot of people, sometimes they just don't know history, and history is a great thing to know. And people find this interesting. They just don't know it's there, right? And so I'd love to see if this is something that you're interested in, making sure that people understand what you have to put out there and helping to invest in it, having an opportunity to not only support it, but make money with you off of enlightening people and showing people what this is. So I don't know what the future holds as far as these projects are concerned, but I definitely want to make sure that people know that this is out there, because I mean, God, what awesome stories and what potential to have this stuff. So I mean, is that something that you're interested in doing, like getting with some of these investors or people who are interested in this story, being able to find you through this podcast and hopefully on the exchange in the future? Is that something that would propel you to keep these projects going?
Absolutely. I mean, the documentary I did on Daniel, it needs work. It's a beautiful film. It needs a big ending. It needs something real positive to happen. Just getting some more of his work seen. I just want people to be able to watch, participate, understand. All these things, when you're sort of narrow scoped and angry about the world not working for you, you got to sort of just like say, oh, like does this connectivity exist in the world now in a way it didn't when I was younger? It was all top stream. It was all the kind of all the horrors you're seeing in the world that are just left over that you're seeing from Harvey Weinstein to Puff Daddy. Those are guys running in the industry half the time.
Yep.
That era is over, thank God. Yeah. And now people can find us. People don't, their biases, like with Daniel's audience, when we've had concerts, it's a lot of young people, a lot of older people, everybody. People ask me, what's your audience? I'm just like, well, I had 16-year-olds there who were just like on Instagram, and I had 8-year-olds who are not. So kind of everybody, but I can't do most of it. You get one skill set, 2 skill sets, and that's all you can do. So this kind of thing is your platform, and this kind of thing is just a perfect thing because I know if I see an artist, I want to find a way to give them money, and Kickstarter has its limits. It's always project limited or very simplistic. It doesn't have an extended life. And this, you're offering a life extension. You're offering the ability to adjust. So absolutely.
It's wonderful. I really do think that this is a day and age where it's an equivalent exchange. And I feel like putting this on a marketplace like this, it allows for people to not only be invested, but invest after they feel invested. That's something that's important to me in creating communities around those types of things and those types of collaborations. People who are on Snap and who are on, Threads, Blue Sky, X, all of these different things, and TikTok. God, there's just so much creativity. So I think with everything that you have and everything that all these other people can do, and then just being invested, it's just an amazing thing. I for your project and for other projects. So I'm really excited about that. I think we're coming up on our time, but what I wanted the last thing I wanted to ask you is, there's so many great stories. Can we get you on here again with you and myself and maybe a few other people as we get this going?
Absolutely. I'm here for you whenever you want. So it's an honor.
It's an honor here. You and I talk offline. Oh my God. It's one of the bright spots of my day, man. I never know what's going to come out of your mouth, and that's the best.
Yeah. I've been pretty controlled this time,
Seems like how all this censorship goes, that we'll be able to push it even more.
Yeah, I'll be even crazier next time. Much greater.
Well, Jason, thank you so much. Again, are there any last words that you have to the audience? A lot of them, young creators, old creators, athletes, just people with dreams. Is there anything that you want to say in closing?
Yeah, I think just if you have to do it, you have to do it, and you're gonna fail. The thing I wish I thought about, and Instagram just fills your brain. The thing I just thought about is like, oh, look at the top baseball players, right? When they're doing great, they're failing, hitting 300. That means they're failing 7 out of 10 times. So, like, just make your little thing and make it work. And listen, I feel this. I can't take my own advice. I'm gonna go off this and feel like, oh, I gotta do something for Daniel, and I don't know what it is. But you've got to just like go ahead and do the thing you need to do. And now I'm interested in having your audience like stock market manipulate, like all these great TikTokers. Let them buy the stock cheap, and then let them put out Daniel's stuff and watch the stock go up, and let them absolutely manipulate. So that's my advice to people to take down.
Hey man, yeah, that's it. That's it. As long as we get some people the exposure and the support that they need, I'm all for it. And there's some great collaborations that I think will come out of it. So
And let me ask you one.
yeah, sure. Yeah.
What is your dream on the platform?
Oh, my dream is pretty simple. I want to see people get access to things that they want and need. For me, it's just really important because I've seen a lot of friends, a lot of family, a lot of coworkers through VFX and comic books and everything else not get the opportunity that they wanted. And I think that when people are willing to support you in one way or another, they should be rewarded for that too. More than just a sense of pride and t-shirt. You know, like there's a synergy there. And before I leave this earth, I want to see that culture implemented. So that's what I want overall. And it's just fun every day being able to talk with people like yourself and creators and athletes and investors, and like everyone's got a dream. I just want to see that dream get out. That's it.
I can shake on that.
Wait, other stuff. Well, Jason, thank you so much. This is our first. I really appreciate you joining the Origins Club. We appreciate hearing your story. For those of you out there, if you like more of this, we'll be doing more of this weekly and bi-weekly. We'll be having a Twitch streams channel. We will have YouTubes and all of the social media. So don't forget to visit, like, and subscribe there. And again, thank you very much to all of you, and thank you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Alan. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you. Bye.